Sebastian, welcome to San Juan.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's your first time down here. I was surprised to hear that, actually.
Yeah, it's good to be here and happy to spend some days with you.
It's great to have you down here. So I wanted to have a little chit-chat about M&A and Anticimex North America. So remind me, like all these months run together. When the heck did you join Anticimex? I'm trying to think here.
I joined back in April of 2021, so about going on a year and a half.
And you came, did you come right from Corp Dev was it Otis you were at? Where'd you come from?
So I was with Schindler.
Schindler. Okay.
Yeah, right before Anticimex. Spent about 3 years there in a Corp Dev role.
Yep.
And very similar to what we're doing here at Anticimex. They have the manufacturing side of the business. But on the transaction side, we were focused on rolling up service companies to build route density throughout the U.S.
Yep.
So very similar strategic role. And prior to that had another corporate development role. So I've had 3 buy-side roles. And then before that, I was on your side of the business doing sell-side M&A for a couple investment banks.
Yep, that's great. So what's it been like now? You're running the Corp Dev M&A efforts for Anticimex in North America. I mean, what's been your experience?
It's been great. I thought I was doing a lot of deals in another life until I got to Anticimex. The growth story has been tremendous. Over the last 18 months, we've done 40 or so deals. So a lot of growth, a lot of transformation, which comes with its challenges. Yeah. But overall, it's been very positive. We've got a 3-year plan that we're really focused on that continues to be centered around high growth investments.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So Anticimex North America, Anticimex being a Swedish pest control firm, entered the U.S. If I remember, it was in 2016, probably in the summer, and have kind of, using a decentralized model, built up the East Coast primarily through standalone platforms, right? American, JP McHale, Modern. And then in recent years, you folks began to build out the West Coast. So I guess in your capacity, the M&A function at Anticimex, I know you always talk about the decentralized model, but to a certain degree, I guess M&A from a corporate development perspective is centralized in North America with you leading the charge. How does that work?
Yeah, so you're right. We started about 6 years ago in the East Coast. Fast forward to today, we've got 8 platforms, Maine all the way down to Florida. And then in late 2020, we ventured out west, where we have 3 platforms currently, and looking to continue to grow and replicate what we've done on the East Coast. I'd say naturally with the growth that we've had, there's certain things that over time become centralized because of the efficiencies that you gain from that. But by and large, we've, what I think has been pretty tremendous is we've been able to maintain that decentralized approach, platform to platform. So when you look at Waynes in Alabama, Turner in Florida, Modern up in the Northeast and New Hampshire, those platforms continue to have their DNA. I would call it that they work within the guide ropes of the Anticimex world. Yep. But they continue to have their own identity and growth strategies on the ground. So I think that's been a huge notch for us as we've continued to do acquisitions and tuck those into our platforms. We've been able to focus on the people side of the business and allow for efficient integrations on that front.
Anticimex in North America focuses on 2 broad classifications of acquisitions, right? You go out and buy larger platform businesses that retain the brand, and then you're ultimately doing in tuck-in acquisitions. So, for example, Waynes. Waynes is your platform in Alabama, and you guys have gone out and done, I don't know, a dozen accretive acquisitions over the years for that particular brand. Where do you see this going? You're on the East Coast now, you're on the West Coast. The center of the country is white space for Anticimex. What sort of discussions are having had behind the scenes as to growth?
Yeah, it's multifaceted. I'd say we're continually interested in building density at our existing platforms. Yep. I think that's the biggest return on the investment. That being said, we're also interested in continuing to extend our footprint. And so, with our Northern and Southern California platform, we see a lot of opportunity there for further consolidation. We just did an acquisition in Phoenix, so we continue to extend our footprint in the Arizona market, where we entered through Tucson.
Yep.
You're right, the Midwest is something we've been eyeing for years. We just haven't found the right opportunity to go in.
Yep.
Texas is another market that we're not currently in, that we want to be in. And so, I'd say it's not one size fits all. We're focused on our current platforms because, again, it's the biggest return on investment that we're going to get on an acquisition. But we know with our long-term growth targets that we have to continue entering new territories through new platforms, and then obviously playing the roll-up game thereafter. So it's both sides of the fence on whether we're going to do a density play or a green space.
Are you guys particularly opportunistic when it comes to platforms, or do you otherwise go out and specifically seek targets in specific markets?
Yeah, we have kind of our criteria set on what we like to see for platform investment. And so I would say we're less opportunistic on those. We think we have a good kind of eye on the market and kind of what, as you know, there's fewer and fewer platform targets available.
Yeah.
But I'd say we've got a pretty good foothold on what we like to see on a platform acquisition. And they're very different from bolt-on acquisitions, right? Because we're going into a new space, we don't have a presence, we don't have a management team. And so we're, most times we're focused on the people side of the business, on the management team. Are we going to have an asset that has stability, but that can also promote growth thereafter? So I think it's a different, it's a completely different criteria when we're looking at new platforms and new territories versus bolt-on acquisitions.
What would you say to folks out there in the industry who look and say, well, interested in selling my business, but I'm concerned that the acquirer is going to go in and gut my workforce? I mean, is that reality in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of our differentiators is that we don't have a one-size-fits-all. We don't have a cookie-to-cutter approach on acquisitions and integrations. Platform to platform, deal to deal, we have our own integration playbook for that acquisition. But again, by and large, we're a growing business. And so what we've seen over the years through our acquisitions is opportunity for the people we are acquiring, whether it's at that existing platform or it's through corporate or it's moving to another platform, right? And as we grow, there's more and more opportunities. So, but at the same time, we're very transparent. There's going to be change, right? Most of it is positive change. But I think it's getting out in front of the employee base to build trust, to build transparency, that while there is going to be change, it's positive, and there's going to be, if you want it, there's going to be further opportunities down the road with a larger organization that's growing, that's extending their footprint. And there's many examples. I've got a team member on my team that we acquired 4 years ago through an acquisition in Florida. He then became a lead acquisition specialist at the Turner platform, and now is rolled up to the corporate team. And there's so many examples of those, Paul, where acquired people have had opportunities to extend and grow their careers.
Yeah. When you think about the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen asset price inflation across the board, right? Acutely in pest control. I mean, what's your feel now? And we're having this chat here in October of 2022. We're seeing yields spike. We're seeing equity markets have some problems. What's your feel on what the M&A market is like now and the appetite for both Anticimex, but as well as what you can ascertain by your other competitors in the market and their willingness to continue to support these sorts of prices?
Yeah. I'd start by saying we're still in the acquisition game.
Yeah.
We're still very active. But what we've seen over the last couple of months is somewhat of a slowdown because of what we're seeing in the markets and the inflationary pressure. Not necessarily a slowdown in activity, but maybe a slowdown in the rising valuations that we've seen over the last 18 months. You and I both recognize that at some point it was gonna top out.
You know, you mentioned private equity, right? So when you got into the pest control space a couple of years ago, sure, there were private equity firms playing around. And to be fair, Anticimex is a private equity back holding company, right? But I mean, there has really been a proliferation of PE activity in the space, you know, in 2022. I tend to think that's a combination of, you know, the COVID effect with resi services, you know, as well as what we saw with fiscal and monetary policy over the last couple of years. But I mean, you personally, do you think this whole movement of PE into the space really has legs? It's already a crowded space. There's a finite number of quality platform acquisitions out there. I mean, what does a guy like you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there are, as we said earlier, a finite number of platform companies. I think the game for them in a leveraged buyout, right, is to come in with the platform, but then to roll, you know, subsequent transaction up where they can get the arbitrage on their valuation. And so, you know, I think we've got a few strong players now that have kind of come in and made some good acquisitions. But it's going to be interesting to see if we have further new entrants that see, you know, extensive consolidation play to justify their entrance. But I do think it's going to be, you know, it's going to be a struggle to find platform acquisitions as consolidation continues to further.
You know, as an acquirer, you're often competing on transactions. You win some, you lose some. You know, when you started at Anticimex, I would imagine if you were to lose a deal, you would lose to another strategic in the industry, like a Rentokil or a Terminix, for example. Is it safe to say that now if you lose a deal, it's primarily to a private equity firm as opposed to your competitors in the space?
I would ask you that question, but...
Me personally, yes. I mean, I wanted to, I was interested in your perspective on it, but yeah, I mean, Sebastian, what? At least 50% of the deals we do now go to private equity.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
And I think that's ramped up significantly over the last year. And we're okay losing deals, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to win them all.
Yeah. You know, of course, you were a sell-side banker for a while, and then you got on the buy side and did corp dev. You were in the elevator space. I mean, having now been in pest control for a few years, what are some of the interesting nuances you've picked up about this industry versus everything you've seen in the past? If anything, maybe there's not any interesting nuances.
Yeah. You know, when I first entered the industry, I was super impressed with the margins.
Yeah.
Right. And that was one of the things that really attracted me to the space. But what's most interesting as we kind of look at, you know, we look at a lot of targets, is the opportunity, right? A lot of these businesses have grown to 2, 3, 4, 5 million, and they've done a good job of it. But even with all the mistakes that they're making, there's still so much opportunity to really drive. And
they're hard to break, huh?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But what I love most about this industry is kind of similar to what I saw in Elevator. It's a really people space driven industry. And so, you know, a lot of these guys, they're, you know, they haven't, blue collar guys put a ton of sweat equity into their business. And it's really fun getting to know them and getting to understand what makes them tick and how they've grown their businesses. And by and large, very humble people that have been so successful. So I enjoy a lot of that, just getting to know the business owners and you know, trying to figure out how we can partner with them to maybe make their businesses a little bit better.
When you think about pest control, you know, clearly we've had a COVID bump, right? It's been a boon to the industry, particularly on the residential side. And, you know, clearly things are changing, right? We've got the highest inflation you and I have never seen in our natural life, have never seen inflation like this, right? And, you know, my suspicion is that by the time we get into 2023, we're gonna start to see cancel rates tick up. You just mentioned margins a second ago. I think we'll start to see some real margin pressure in this industry, like other industries. I mean, what's your gut feel on that? How do you think about potential margin pressure we might have here coming?
Yeah, we've been talking about that for a while, and luckily I think we got in front of a lot of that earlier this year when we started putting out price increases across all of our platforms. And you really only got a shot or two to do that, right? And I think we timed that correctly. And I agree with you. We're going to continue to see pressure on the margin, and so it's how do you pass that on, to the customer, so that you can get in front of those pressures.
How much elasticity of demand is there in the residential market? I mean, I think it's pretty safe to assume that if you look at the numbers, you've seen price increases during the course of 2022, anywhere from 5% on the low end. I mean, we've seen all the way up to 20% in certain circumstances. But I mean, at what point does the consumer really begin to push back? Is the question. Is that conversations you guys have internally over at Anticimex to really assess or suss out the elasticity of demand?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's platform to platform dependent, right? In terms of how much more room we have to go. But I think it also goes back to the customer experience, right? And what are you able to deliver to justify, the pricing? We've had a lot of success this year rolling out Smart Residential, which is our, sustainable pesticide-free solution. And so it's all for us. It's always about, what's the customer experience, what's the value proposition, so that a customer isn't so quick to leave you. I think right now, if you were to ask me that question at the beginning of the year, I would have said 20%, probably not all in one swoop. And I think that's slowly dwindling down. And I think, if folks haven't taken advantage of Q1 and Q2 to pass on those price increases, sooner than later, they're going to be out of time to do that, right? Because the consumer is feeling the pinch at the grocery store, at the gas pump, and that's not lightening as we kind of get through the year.
Do you get the sense that real growth rates are beginning to decelerate in pest control? When you look at, now that we're in Q4, when I look at year-over-year comparisons, we tend to see, if we see revenue up 11 or 12%, and I see a price increase of 10% that took place in January, that tells me that, although there's nominal growth, but real growth is decelerating versus where it was in 20 and 21. Do you get that same impression?
Yeah, we get that same feeling, and I would tell you, you can circumvent that with your retention rates, right? If you're not going to be getting that double-digit organic growth, there's other ways in the business to kind of fix the leaky bucket, so to speak. And so we spend a lot of time on our retention rates, cancel reasons, why is the customer leaving us? That's a big focus for us, right? And so it seems like the industry standard is around 1.5, 2 points per month. And we work hard, right, to get that more kind of in that 12% range per year. And I think that can propel your growth rates as the market maybe slows down a little bit.
Do you get, to what extent, you just mentioned Smart a second ago, to what extent, at least from an M&A perspective, does Anticimex North America size up an acquisition target based on the feasibility of rolling out Smart within that organization?
All the time. Like I said earlier, we rolled out residential this year. We're having a ton of success. Some platforms more than others, but the early goings look positive. When we look at commercial pest control businesses, we start to think about, okay, how is Smart a good fit for this business? What sectors are they in? But it's more times than not something we talk about as we're looking at acquisitions. If you're looking at a acquisition that's got a exclusion business, right? How can we complement that with Smart? If they've got food processing plants or factories, right? Is that an opportunity? So we're continually looking to build on the residential side. And then obviously on the commercial side, it's been more of a struggle because we don't have that national footprint. But it's there for the taking if there's an acquisition with a strong commercial footprint.
Sean Hollis, your president of Wayne's platform, is here with us. And a little bit later today, really looking forward to our chat about how somebody like you, who's more at the corporate level, interplays with the platform president, specifically in determining what are appropriate acquisition targets. But I guess while I have you here today, I wanted to ask you, when you have the platform business that's let's talk about Jim McHale, for example, or Sean, to what extent is that platform president determining whether or not an acquisition is appropriate versus you folks at the corporate level?
That's a great question. So me at the corporate level, I work with all of our platforms, all 11 of them. And I would tell you, it's a balance, right? They're going to be more focused on the operational aspect of the business, right? Is it a good fit? Is it a good cultural fit for their organization? What's the service delivery model? How does the recurring revenue fit in terms of what they're doing? Me as a corp dev guy, I'm going to be more interested in the numbers and the profitability and the growth.
Yep.
And so it's a combined effort. We work very closely with all of our platforms. And obviously, they're also going to be interested on day one, right? How does that organization fit into theirs, right? And so it's a lot of fun. We look at a lot of deals together. With Wayne's, we've done, I think both of them with you. We've done 2 deals in Nashville over the last year.
Yep.
With JPM, we had a great year last year, building Fairfield County up in Connecticut. I think we did 4 deals there. But yeah, it's always going to be a combined effort between the operational aspect of the acquisition and the financial aspect, which we lead at Corp Dev.
Now, I know that you guys ultimately have to go to the board to get approval for acquisitions, but who's determining what you guys are willing to pay? Is it you? Is it the platform president? How does that, what's the inner workings? How does that take place at Anticimex?
I'd say it's both. They obviously have to live with the acquisition, and they have to justify the performance and the valuation, right, over that first year while it's getting integrated.
Yep.
And then, the corp dev team, so to speak, has kind of the controls and balances in place to make sure we're going to get a good return on that investment. But ultimately, it's we sit at the table and we kind of have a back and forth, and we always leave the room aligned in terms of what we want to pay and how we want to structure the deal. But yeah, we don't always agree.
Yeah.
That's going to happen, and that's okay. But it's always a combined effort. And then once we go to the board or the troika, we're aligned. We know what we're getting into, and the rest is history.
So I would imagine you probably see hundreds of acquisition targets per year. And I realize that your platform presidents are probably sussing out what makes sense for them. But I mean, in your own mind, what makes an interesting acquisition candidate for Anticimex in general?
Yeah, we do look at a lot of acquisitions. And I tell you, we kind of have our criteria set on what we like to see, but there are times we get out of the box. If it's a strategic acquisition or something that we think has different legs that could help us in our growth trajectory. But I tell you, we like the recurring part of the business, right? Just like anyone else. We like the subscription revenue. We like the predictability. Pricing for us is important, right? Especially in this environment. If there's a business that hasn't necessarily taken the steps to keep up, is that something that we're going to struggle with and potentially lose customers on the other side of the acquisition?
Do you typically, I mean, this is you raise a great point, and I hate to cut off your train of thought, but I want to focus on this for a second. When you look at potential acquisition targets, you'll see some guys who are at the median of the market in their local area. You'll see guys that are priced highly. And then you'll see some guys that have kind of lagged from a pricing perspective. What does that mean for somebody like you? Do you look at it and say, well, we'll be able to raise prices after we make the acquisition? Or do you look at it and say, well, raising prices will probably lose customers, it's complicated, I'd rather go out and buy somebody that's got a lot of pricing power? How do you think about that?
It's both. I mean, our approach isn't to kind of take the keys to the company on day one and go out gangbusters and increase prices, right? It's a slower process. Sometimes we wait a year. But what I was getting at is if, let's say we find a target that's 30-40% below market or below kind of where we're at, that's going to take time, right? And the returns on that investment it's going to be a lot more extensive. So we recognize that most independents are going to be below we are, and that's okay. And so if there's a turn or two of pricing that we have to do, we're comfortable with that, and we've got a playbook for that.
Okay.
And we build in the attrition that we think we're going to get from that. Done so many deals in the U.S., 80, 90 deals, that we've got a lot of data, right, that we can leverage to kind of dictate what we think is going to happen.
Yep.
But again, if it's a company that has never done a price increase, right, and it's got legacy customers that are 50% of what the market today dictates,
Yep.
that's a tough acquisition to do, and a tough acquisition to get returns on. So pricing is important. Like I said earlier, if we're going into, the people side of the business is always important to us, right? Because we're growing and we need the support, and we obviously recognize that it's a people business. It's not just a book of business. It's the people behind the scenes that are driving that business. So we're always focused on talent that we're bringing over. And even particularly if we're going into a new green space, or, maybe it's a branch for us that's been struggling to scale, right? Hasn't had the right leadership, hasn't had the right people to kind of drive that business. We want to know, who are we picking up, right? Who's the middle management, even down to the technicians, right? Do they have a long tenureship with the company?
How does a guy like you suss that out on the onset? Like, you're looking at materials, you're clearly not sitting down with employees. It's hard to be, at the 50,000 foot view and really determine that. But so what are some sort of assessments you make when you're looking at things?
You're right, it's hard, right? Because usually you just have access to the owner,
Yep.
and maybe they're bringing, their right-hand person into the deal, and that's it. And so it's really hard on paper to assess the culture of the company and the people side of the business. Yep. But we spend a lot of time and diligence with the owners, right? Asking the right questions on kind of who's second in line, who's the middle management, all the way down to the technicians. How has he hired? How has he built the team? How involved is he or she in the business, right?
Yep.
If they're more removed, right, and we can kind of get a good feel on that, then we know there's a strong team behind kind of running the day-to-day operations, right? And so it's always impossible, right, to understand fully everyone in the organization. But just as much as we kind of examine the numbers, we spend a lot of time on our people diligence and on trying to understand, okay, who are we getting from this deal, and how are we going to be able to fit them into our platform or our branch that this acquisition is going to fold into.
So you're looking at recurring portfolio, you're looking at relative pricing, you're trying to understand the people, which is an important aspect. What are some other things you're looking at?
Revenue composition. So, by and large, we're a general pest control company, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, we do termite and some other ancillary services, but and you're very familiar. In the past, we've bought companies that we've had to kind of restructure a little bit because they were doing stuff outside of pest control. Yep. That takes work, right? That's distracting, and reorganizing that it can be a challenge. And so, for the most part, we want a very tight business that's pure play pest control. We love the termite business. Waynes and Turner does a great job with that down in the South. And so revenue composition is important. Retention, right? We've had a lot of opportunities together looking at some of these heavy growth companies, and when you just look at the papers, the numbers on the paper, everything looks great. It's up and to the right and growth, and but how solid are those customers, right? Are they just good at selling and not really good at delivering service? And so they've got a retention issue. We spent a lot of time looking at retention, going back 2, 3, 4, 5 years. How has that trended? Why are the customers canceling? So we spent a lot of time going into the company system and trying to kind of gather the raw data and dissect it and try to understand at least how the business is progressing through that growth. Is it sustainable? Or am I going to have to hit 30, 40% growth the next year to sustain the portfolio?
How does somebody like you think about, when you talk about retention, so it's clear Anticimex really spends a lot of time understanding historically how has this company retained its customers. What sort of methodologies are you using to make those assessments? Are you looking at kind of open and closing portfolio where you say, okay, here's the number of customers I have on January 1. How many of those same customers exist on December 31st? Are you looking at monthly churns? What's the methodology that you like to use personally?
Great question. A little bit of everything, but ultimately it's kind of how you laid it out. We like to see, okay, what did the portfolio start with at the first of the year, and how well were they able to retain those customers through the end of the year. We do look at month to month and some of the growth in year to try to understand what they're selling and who they're selling. But when we look at, if we're going to look at one retention figure, it's what did you start with, what did you end with?
How important is it when you think about a target to, the industry, of course, has gone through a transition over the last decade where they've moved from service charges to kind of recurring billing. And I know many of your platforms or Anticimex use like a monthly credit card billing, right? You got JP McHale does it, American does it. There's a lot of Modern, for example. I mean, how important is it for you for a tuck-in acquisition to have implemented that versus the quarterly service charge, for example?
Very important.
Yeah.
But we've done it all. We've done companies that are on note cards, have no credit cards on file, and we try to get away from that a little bit. But every now and then you run into a couple routes that make sense, and so we'll do it. But yeah, for the most part, I mean, when you think of an integration and how hard they are, right? Having credit cards on file, having the monthly billing like we do, having all that set up already takes away a layer of complexity that we don't have to deal with on the other side of the acquisition. So, it's funny you ask because, we do the financial due diligence, we do the operational due diligence, and you've got all the KPIs, but you wouldn't think, hey, how many credit cards do they have on file? Are they doing the monthly billing? I think a lot of that plays into, back to what we were talking about on the retention side, a lot of that helps with customer retention, right? Because the customer's they're not thinking about it anymore, right? They're just auto billed, and it's evergreen until they decide to cancel, which is usually because you didn't provide a good service or you let them down in some way.
I'm going to ask you a question that I get a lot, and I'm interested to see how you would answer this. Let's say you pick a market like Nashville, right? You've got two $5 million revenue businesses, both operating in Nashville, not door to door, just traditional businesses. Company A does 90% recurring general residential pest. Company B, of course, is doing $5 million, but let's say they've got $3 million in general pest, they do $1 million in termite, they do some other ancillary services. What business, on its face, based on the information that you know, is potentially more attractive to you?
On paper, the 90% recurring, but again, there's more to it than just that, right? Than just the numbers and just the revenue composition, the recurring, all that, right? It's, the first thing Sean and I are going to talk about is the culture and the service model, right? Because for us, it's all that other stuff matters, but ultimately, like we were talking about, Sean has to live with that business and his team on day one, and they've got to integrate that business and they've got to fold it into their Nashville operations. And so doing the deal is easy, valuing the deal is easy, but taking that target, right? And a lot of these companies, they've got people that have been with the owner for decades, right? And so which one do we think positions us better for success is something that we're going to highly consider. The integration to me is where you can really lose the return on an investment. And so what's a good fit? Culturally, service model, what's going to put these guys in the best position to integrate that business, continue to grow, continue to sustain the business that we're buying.
What's your overall perspective on Anticimex North America's ability to integrate transactions now in 2022?
Very good.
Happy?
Very good. But we're always looking to get better, right? And so we do postmortems on every deal, right? What worked, what didn't work, how can we get better? We're not perfect, right? And I tell that to every business owner that I meet. I'm not trying to sell you the perfect transition integration for your customers and employees. There's always road bumps, but I think over the years we've gotten better. We've learned from our mistakes, and we continue to just you know, we continue to learn from the mistakes that we make to get better with each and every acquisition.
What's the most gratifying aspect of your job today?
I would say the growth, both personally and with my colleagues, right? So, done more acquisitions at Anticimex than I've done in my previous 10 years, both
Sure.
on the buy side and sell side. So with that has come a lot of growth, a lot of learnings, humbled by what this organization is able to do on a day in and day out basis. And then helping my team grow. So I've got a fantastic team, 3 individuals located in different parts of the country that focus on different platforms. And so, you know, they're wonderful, make my life easier. But helping them grow professionally, personally, and seeing them, what they're able to kind of do acquisition after acquisition and how they've kind of grown in their journey at Anticimex is wonderful.
You know, if I'm going to ask you about the most gratifying aspect, I'm also going to ask you about the most frustrating aspect of being an M&A guy in North America in 2022. What is it?
That's a tough question. A lot of things come to mind. And I don't know which ones I want to say on camera, but I would tell you, and I don't think it's going away, but again, I think it's something that between us as a buyer and sellers, we continue to learn and get better. But the final stages of an acquisition, when you know, when things are going smoothly and you think you've got it all figured out and you've got a smooth, you know, kind of light at the end of the tunnel, and then you get stuck on some silly issues or some, and I get it, right? It's for sellers, they're going through this the first and probably only time in their lifetime, and so, you know, they want to get the best deal. Totally understand that. But there are times when, you know, you're fighting over a consulting agreement or a lease, or, you know, something that's in the grand scheme of things fairly small. But I think that comes with the job too, right? That's part of the job, and trying to. I think we take a somewhat of a different approach where, you know, we're not going to bend backwards over everything, but we're willing to listen and talk through issues with owners and try and work things out, right? We're not going to. Our style is not to fire emails back and forth, right? If there's an issue, we try to get on a call and talk through it and see what's the solution. How can we start this marriage with both sides being happy, right? Because that's the best way to do it.
Well, it's tough with deals, right? I mean, you're right. It is a marriage, and you want to have that relationship. And when you're bickering over, you know, $1,300 a month in rent versus $1,400 in rent, it's complicated. That's one of my, you know, one of the things that I really tried to do here with the team in 2022 is focus on our clients really thinking about the big picture of a deal and not getting hung up with $5,000 a month versus $6,000 a month in a consulting agreement. And like you said, everyone wants to get the best deal, and I get that. But I think we all collectively still have a lot of work to do there, huh?
Yeah. And we talk about it a lot, right? I mean, when you're bickering, right, about some of the stuff that like we say in the grand scheme of things is small, we all tend to forget about why do we sit down at the table in the first place, right? What do we love about this deal? What do we love about this partnership? And I think refocusing on that, right? How is this partnership going to work? How are we going to put your customers and your employees in the best position for success going forward? That's why we originally struck the deal. And so I think that's important. Sometimes we lose sight of that in the 11th hour, trying to perfect the deal and, you know, get every last piece sorted perfectly.
I guess the last question I have for you this morning, Sebastian, is, you know, when you think about your professional career over the decades, what do you think are some of the most important things you've learned at Anticimex versus what you maybe did not know historically?
The sexiest businesses aren't always the best businesses, right? When I started in banking back in 2010 at Bank of America Merrill, I covered retail, I covered direct-to-consumer, pretty cool companies, right, that were very tangible and sold, sold household products and stuff like that. Never in a million years would I imagine, I'd enter this industry that kind of on the face of it isn't all that sexy, right? It's a residential service. But what I've learned is sometimes, you don't judge a book by its cover, right? It's a great industry, great people, growing, recession-proof. And I've met some of the best people in my career that I will call friends for a lifetime.
Yeah.
And so it's probably the thing I appreciate most about coming into pest control and spending some time in this industry over the last 18 months.
I agree 100% with every word that you said. It's a really interesting industry. I'm grateful to be a part of it. Sebastian, I appreciate you spending some time with us here in San Juan this week, and I look forward to having our chat later with Sean Hollis from Wings.
Thanks, Paul. Pleasure.